Okay. My name is Peter Young. I'm the Yale class of '74 from Branford College, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 16th in a series of webinars and panels on careers after Yale. This series focuses on providing students and alumni with candid views of different professions via panels of successful practitioners in each field. And the overall concept is really try to cover professions that Yaleys pursue in both large and small numbers, but in particular the ones where there are numerous myths and misconceptions about what the profession is, where it's headed, how you get there, and what kinds of people do well or are happy and or happy. I think all of you know that if you believe what the TV shows tell you about being a lawyer or or a doctor and so forth, you could easily be misled. Today's profession is Internet and Data Services, careers. To date, through the first 15 that we've done, we've had 1,900 students and alumni attend, and 2,200 have viewed the recorded videos of the last 13. So, and this one will also be available for people to watch later on. So what are some of the professions we've covered? We've covered legal twice, investment banking twice, medical twice, consulting twice, entrepreneurism, jointly with the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute, drama and film, education, government service, nonprofit organizations, investing, and then we had one where we had the panelists compare investing, investment banking, and consulting, and where they had been in those different fields. What's unique, a little bit unique about this event is that we have 3 simultaneous venues. So we have a meeting room here in New York at Paul Weiss. We have room 119 at William Harkness Hall at Yale. And then we have a large number of people who are participating by streaming video. So today our panelists are here in New York, and with Yale and New York connected by video conference. And then we have the streaming video to the rest of the people. So before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to introduce 2 people who are at the Yale location. One is Jim Boyle, who's head of the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute, who I think is somewhere, there he is in the back, who he is the head of the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute, which, as many of you know, is a very vital and important engine at Yale around technology and startups. The second is Brian Frennett of the Yale Office of Career Strategies, who is going to coordinate questions from students during the Q&A at the Yale location. So I see students are starting to come in. I also like to briefly thank a number of people who have helped this effort. Elaine Mazzarella and the staff of the Yale Office of Career Strategies, Steve Bloom and Elizabeth Rocher of AYA. Trish Takemoto is here in the room here, who is with the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni. Mai Liu of the Yale Alumni Association of New York, the Junior Class Council, and others. These organizations have helped either with the planning or with the marketing of this event. And last, I just want to give a special thanks to Paul Weiss, who has graciously provided the use of this meeting room here in New York and their video conference equipment. I think Paul Weiss is probably well known to many people, but they are a well-known law firm with more than 700 lawyers. And Les Fagan, a Yale graduate, is a partner we have been working with and who has been a panelist on the legal panel. So for today's event, I will first introduce the panelists, and then I will guide them through the 6 questions that all of you saw on your invitation. And in the end, we want to make sure we leave some time at the end for questions and answers. Now, for those of you who are at Yale, you raise your hand, and Brian will choose who should ask a question, and there'll be a microphone there, similarly here in New York. And for those of you participating through the streaming video, you should send your questions via email to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com, which will show up on my iPad here, and we'll be able to pose your questions. We expect to end promptly at 5:30, but the panelists here have graciously agreed to stay on to answer some questions and meet with attendees here in New York. So our panelists today, to my left is Justin Koslin, who is a lead product manager at Google Ideas, I suspect a few of you have heard of Google. To my right, we have Kevin Ryan, who is chairman and founder of Gilt and has a very long resume of things he's done. So we don't have an hour to go through that, but many of you also recognize that he was the CEO of DoubleClick during the time where it grew very, very rapidly, very successfully. And last, on the far right, we have Jared Yuster, who is the co-founder and CEO of Pico Quantitative Trading, which provides data and data services to the financial industry. So let me get started, and we'll start by really asking each of you really to answer the following question, which is, tell me about how you got into the profession and what you view as a typical career path. So maybe we just start from right to left.
Certainly. Thank you, Peter. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you, everyone. So I graduated from Yale in 1993 with a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering. I worked at Intel in California in a clean room in a white suit doing semiconductor research. It was very interesting work, but very antisocial. Most of the people in the group had higher degrees, PhDs, so I went back for a degree at Columbia for a master's in electrical engineering and computer science. And halfway through the degree, I started having nightmares about being stuck in a clean room, and ended up through consulting with my friends, who most of them were finance majors, and went to Wall Street. It was a time when engineers and computer science majors were migrating to Wall Street. So this was in 1995. So the last 20 years I've been in financial services. I guess probably what's most relevant is I was at Merrill Lynch in 2002 through 2009. When I joined at Merrill Lynch, trading was still voice-driven. So I was responsible for computerizing and helping Merrill Lynch move to a model of move to electronic trading. So I was there for about 7.5 years. We took the technology, which was dispersed over 13 business units that had 9 different platforms, and we consolidated them onto one. And we did a tremendous amount of work to expand the data platform as well. So it was at a time when most of lost my train of thought. So anyway, I was there through tremendous growth years. The business, when I started, there were 2 of us, and we grew to about 1,250 people. After Bank of America acquired Merrill Lynch, I then started a company. I left and started a company called Pico Trading. So we provide big data services. We provide technology and managed services for banks, for hedge funds, and for other financial technology companies. Thank you.
Great. There you go. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. I'm Kevin Ryan. So my career, I started off really at Yale. My senior year, junior year, got involved with the Yale College Student Investment Group. And that actually led me to where I am today in an odd way, because I had never purchased a stock before. I thought I should learn something about it. Ended up running this group at Yale. That led me to a career of 4 years on Wall Street. Then I went to business school. So I was doing investment banking, went to business school. Then I went to work for a media company, to Disney, in finance. I knew I wanted to eventually run a company, and so I was going up the sort of the finance CFO path. I worked for a company called United Media. As part of that, I started a website in '95, and it was small, seemed very exciting. I obviously had not planned on a career in the internet because it didn't really exist before that point. And so I realized that was the most fundamental trend in my lifetime that I was going to see, was this idea of the internet. And so broke away and decided to go either start or join an internet company. And DoubleClick started in '96. We built it up from a few people to 1,500 people, sold it, and then have started several companies in the last 7 or 8 years. So I have a couple thousand employees in those various companies in different fields. So it's a hard thing to plan for, because they're giving you advice, and I told you I have exciting news for you. You're going to spend 20 years in a field. The only thing is you don't know that field yet because it doesn't exist yet. That's hard to plan for. I think the thing to remember is that you want to be doing something that is functionally good. No one starts as CEO. So you're going to either be a programmer in technology, you're going to be in sales, you're going to be in marketing, you're going to be doing something in finance, and you have to be good at what you do, and you have to like it. and if you move up that path, you'll get more and more responsibility, and then you can find the right job for you, whether that's running a company, a division, managing technology, doing whatever you want to do. So you got to like what you're doing, and I've always liked what I've been doing.
So I guess, Kevin, you're could be described as a serial entrepreneur, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so it means someone who has no focus, and so no consistency whatsoever. So he starts a number of random things, but it's very fun when it works.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sure. So I applied to Yale as a political science and economics double major, and somewhere along the way I took a wrong turn and found that computer science was actually more fun. That it gave me the same idea of looking at structures and systems, but it was a mathematical way of expressing that. And then I found out that I could get free pizza money if I became a Google campus ambassador. And for those of you who are college grads, try to remember just how much you would do for free pizza. So I signed up for this random program, which, by the way, still exists and still gives money that you can use for pizza parties. And I figured, okay, well, I'm in this campus ambassador thing. I should probably apply to Google. I applied for an engineering job, an internship. I didn't get it. So the next year I applied again, and I also applied for some other random jobs, like product manager, whatever that was. And they gave me a call back to interview me for the associate product manager internship. Never got a call for the actual software engineering job. Ended up doing the internship, ended up going back full time, and never looked back.
It shows where pizza parties can lead you. You got to be
That's
careful.
right. It's all about the pizza.
Got to be careful.
You're into cereal. I'm into pizza.
So let's start out with a broader question, and it's a little bit of hard question to answer. But when you think about internet businesses and data services, where are things headed? And I think, like all industries, there are good and bad things happening. So maybe if each of you could just comment on things that you consider both good things that are happening in the industry, and then maybe things that are not so obviously bad but are bad. So do you want to start? But it's optional whether you want to answer this question. Right?
Yeah, I'll start with the bad first. I think the biggest myth is that people who go to Wall Street are evil, and that high-frequency trading is evil. As far as what I've seen in terms of the change, when I started on Wall Street about 20 years ago, databases were generally relational databases. So, and then we saw a transition to object-oriented databases. And with financial services, there's so much information, it's structured, and we work with generally time series data. But now you're seeing with internet, you see unstructured data. But there's a vast amount, and it gets distributed through various different technologies, one being MongoDB, and we use Hadoop and Vertica and other technologies as well.
Yeah, I think, the overall takeaway, which I think is no surprise to everyone, is that software, internet, technology are just, in many cases, taking over the world. And so it's not just one industry now. It impacts almost every single thing we do. So you go into a Tesla, which is theoretically a car company, and yet everyone is coding. I mean, you fix your Tesla through software downloads. So that was inconceivable in a car 20 years ago. And so it's not just that media has been taken over and everything is online, that car companies, energy, Wall Street, and I don't mean taken over completely, but it just becomes a huge part of what you do. Understanding what happens in, biotech these days is instrumental. It impacts you if you're a lawyer now. So the good news is that this role of technology, Mark Andreessen famously said, software is eating the world. And I think we've got another, good 10, 20, 30 years of this. And so I think it's a great career broadly to go into, and it's so broad that you can choose what you want to do. You could be interested in biotech, you could be interested in forestry, you could be interested in shopping, and technology will probably play a big role. And either way, it will provide most of the growth that occurs in that industry, either directly or indirectly. So I'm obviously very biased, but I think it's an incredible career and a necessary thing to understand regardless of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, my career is an example of that. Mm-hmm. So, my team looks at technology design for global challenges, and specifically counter censorship and counter cycles of violence like human trafficking, money laundering, etc., police accountability. And these are issues that 10 years ago would not have been considered technology issues at all. But now, all the debates around Ferguson coming out of that are about body-worn cameras, which is a technological development. And how should those work? who gets to see the data, when, how, what logging is in place, what auditing is in place. These are partly social science questions, but they're also technical questions. And so the team that I am part of the leadership of has a mix of people with technology backgrounds and global affairs backgrounds. So in some cases, people who have been very senior in organizations like the U.S. Department of State. By the way, the technologists are much younger because we're able to add value very quickly without having a deep relationship base, whereas the people who came up on the policy side typically have to have at least 20 years experience. So note for young alums, which path is quicker. But the challenge that comes with that is that most of the policy folks don't know how to think about technology. They've been doing work for 20, 30 years. Maybe they're now in a leadership role at something like the U.S. Agency for International Development or a large foundation, a large nonprofit, and they've been told by their board that they need to be using technology, and they don't really know what that is, but they read an article about Twitter, and so they're going to do something with Twitter and hashtags. And so the challenge is sort of navigating the opportunities, but also the lack of sophistication in some parties about what exactly it is that they want.
If I can add one thing to that, you know, one of the things I was most interested in my first couple years at Yale was public policy, political science, things like that. And today, you know, I meet with the city of New York, the mayor's office, or people around that, probably once a week, every 2 weeks, because they're both looking at the opportunity of tech job growth, but they're also both excited about and petrified about the potential risk and reward of using technology in a better way to run city government. You know, if they do it wrong, they end up with the Obamacare website, and it becomes a major political issue. If they do it right, their constituents are happy, they've saved a lot of money, and they have better data to make better decisions and make life better. And they know that's hard to do. So just, there is no part of society today that isn't thinking about these issues all the time, worried about it, and needs people, you know, often young people coming up the ranks who have background and expertise and can add value.
Can I have one more comment too?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, in the old model of city services, if you are a city official, maybe you're working on inspecting buildings for fire code conformity, you're going to physically visit a certain number of buildings a day, and your impact in the course of a year is limited by the number of hours you can work because you have to physically show up at physical places in the physical world. One of the side effects of this new world we're moving to, where everything is software and data driven, is that if you're an engineer working for the city and you develop a smarter algorithm that changes the way that these inspections are prioritized, your impact is not bounded by the number of hours in your day. You can impact every single New Yorker in a way that was impossible when you had to physically arrive on physical sites. So the scale that you can have with the impact of your time is much higher in this new world through technology.
Yeah, I heard about that, where I guess using algorithms, it allowed the inspectors to figure out where was a better place to inspect, right? That was
exactly, and that's one example, but I think that the principle applies very generally, which is that a lot of these challenges that were not traditionally seen as software challenges, they might now have a team of 2 or 3 software developers working on them somewhere in a large bureaucracy. And that team of 2 or 3 people is going to have a way disproportionate impact compared to 2 or 3 people in other divisions that are linearly impactful.
You know, I have a sort of related question to what you're talking about. That is, you know, one of the things that a lot of students are just attracted to startups. But the question is, and it has lots of sex appeal and so forth. Mm-hmm. But if I look at your careers, you didn't necessarily start at a startup and so forth, and maybe that's a dangerous thing, right, to do in terms of being successful longer term. Any thoughts about that? Because, you know, there's some people say the last thing you want to do is do a startup yourself. It's better to be part of a startup or a traditional company for a while before you jump into that. You know, that's one of the myths, right, about what's sexy, right?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that. Look, it can be exciting to be part of a startup at any age, and so I don't discourage people from doing it when they're 21. What I would say is there are very few startups started by 21-year-olds that end up being very, very successful. And, you know, the Mark Zuckerbergs and Bill Gates get disproportionate press. So, but there's 1,000 others that didn't work. I do think a very, very, you know, good career path can be go join a, broadly speaking, technology company. Any one of these companies here. do several years, maybe you do 20 years, but maybe you do 3, 4 years, you learn a lot of things about managing, about working with other people, about use of technology, things like that, and you'll be in a better position, 5 years in, 8 years in, whenever, if you do want to do a startup at that point or not. So I certainly don't tell everyone, you have to go do it when you're 21. I've looked in the internet space overall, and I would say the sweet spot, if there is one, of successful startups are really people that are sort of 26 to maybe 40. After 40, there are fewer examples, unfortunately for me, at 50, 51. But I think you still can do it. It's still working. But actually, I think a lot of the companies are run by people who have enough experience that they can add value, raise money, manage people, but still super dynamic, lots of energy, and willing to try things that are probably crazy to do, but we still do them anyway.
Jared, do you have a comment?
Yeah, a few things. So I would just add that it takes a lot more than a good product to start a company. You have to have relationships, whether it's for fundraising or even just to garner clients. I was fortunate that I was at a large firm and building and starting a business within a large firm. So I did have the safety net of having funding and having a job, and we also had the safety net of having the distribution of Merrill to sell what we built. But we did build a business at a large firm, and I was able to build and develop relationships with clients and others within the industry.
Yeah, I think the doctors have a saying, see one, do one, teach one. And I think that might apply here too.
Yeah. Well, actually, the phrase that my father once said, he said, there's only one thing better than learning from your mistakes, and that's learning from the mistakes of others,
Yeah.
which I thought was one of the best pieces of advice I got. And the likelihood, I think as Kevin says, it doesn't mean you shouldn't get involved with a startup, right? Because it could succeed. Yeah. You just have to put it in perspective as to what the risk profile is and what you may be missing as part of one of the key elements to be successful. What are some of the myths versus the realities? I think this Internet and data service has as many myths as any other profession. So does anyone want to comment that?
Sure. Two that I'll flag really quickly. How many folks, maybe a quick show of hands, saw The Internship? If you could zoom out the camera in New Haven as well. I'm just curious, how popular was that movie? Okay, not very popular. Okay, good. It's not a documentary. For those of you who saw it, for those of you who didn't, you didn't miss a lot in terms of learning how the career works. Although some of the scenes were perfectly amusing. The reality is that people show up at tech companies to do work and to have an impact, and you're not there to play Quidditch. At the same time, I think there is a myth that it's a solitary profession, and that you're really isolated and you're sort of the nerd in the basement. And the reality is that the most impactful and successful engineers, designers, product managers, what have you, are incredibly social, incredibly charismatic, able to work in teams, able to convince people of things, able to listen. And that's a skill set that's core to the daily functioning of the job.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree that when we're interviewing people, if someone's applying for med school or law school, I'm sure they care about a 3.8 GPA versus a 3.6 GPA, but that doesn't lead necessarily to more success in our field. Working with other people is really important. When people ask me what was most impactful for my career in terms of what I did at Yale, for better or worse, for me it was running extracurricular groups. Working with people who didn't have to come every day because it's a volunteer organization, and they only showed up if they thought it was going to be fun, they liked the people, and believed in what we were doing. And you can have a big impact there. And I think actually in many ways that's great training for when you're running a company, especially in our field where everyone can get a job tomorrow if they want to. Every engineer can get 3 offers. So they're only there if they want to be there. And so you've got to make it fun, impactful, and interesting for everyone. So that was my best training.
One of the most impactful experiences for me was when I was working at Intel. They have a culture of optimization and striving for efficiencies. So they gather data at every point in the production process, and they analyze that data to make sure every piece of machinery is working to satisfaction. So I took that knowledge and that experience throughout my career, whether it was at Merrill Lynch, but also at Pico, where not only do we analyze information around trading, but everything around our business, even how long it takes to get a client live, how many resources we have to put towards it. So the market and business is moving much more towards a quantitative approach, and you're seeing at senior level people having quantitative and data analysis backgrounds.
Can any of you want to comment about what, if you look across, data and internet, where are the places where you think just, it's going to be a dead end as an industry, right? And where are places where you sense there's the opportunity? I mean, clearly, for example, everyone's figured out that, creating apps is just not going to make you a millionaire if there are millions and millions of them there and so forth. And initially people got very excited and thought they were going to make a lot of money, and it turns out wasn't the case. Any comments about areas that you either think right now everybody's excited about but really is going to be a dead end, or areas that people, which you really think ought to be very successful and may or may not be obvious to people?
Well, first of all, the app economy is growing faster than just about anything I know. So I'm not even sure I accept the thesis that is a dead end. Starting from scratch, can you be a millionaire doing anything is very, very hard. Most startups don't work. But no, I think app revenue overall, most of it's going to large companies, is growing very, very quickly. I'm not sure I see that many dead ends right now. You just have to separate out the fact that for any area that's growing, there will be 10 competitors that are trying to do what you're doing, and 1,000 people that are trying to do what you're doing, and most will not work, but some will, and it'll recycle, and that's inherent in the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest advice I give people is to surround yourself with really bright and talented people. I was very fortunate in my career to have great mentors and learn from them along the way.
Next set of questions are about characteristics of people, and I think all of you have had the opportunity to be in the profession long enough, so you've seen people do well, in your companies. You've seen people who haven't, but also you've seen people who have been happy and unhappy, and those two things are not necessarily, correlated. Any comments on, what seem to be the, when you look at the people who've done well, right, or so forth, and the people happy, unhappy, what seem to be the characteristics that at least you've seen in the people who've done well or have been happy?
So one thing is, and this is hard, you're trying to figure out what you're going to be good at. And you have to think of all of your competitive set, which is really all the other Yale and Ivy League students out there. What's the right situation for you to be in 10 years from now where you're going to be better than other people, than most people in that? And is it because you're better in the technology front, you're better at managing people, you're better on the creative side? And a lot of it's going to come from, if you're more passionate about what you're doing than most people, you'll probably do well. And I know people who joined a company and a career that they weren't that excited about, it just sounded prestigious, and then all of a sudden they woke up 8 years later and realized that they just didn't, on the weekends, they weren't thinking about their career. They weren't that excited about it. They didn't love it. As a result, they spent less time on it. The guy next to them was working all the time and loves it. I can, like in my career, the mode of success is that I can't even figure out on the weekends what I'm doing for work and what I'm doing for fun. Because I think that everything is happening right now, new ideas, new exciting things going on, I love to read about that all day long. And so I do it for a living. And so that allows me to put a lot of time and love it. If you go down a path and switch 3 times over 15 years, it'll be hard to be successful because you'll be behind other people that did it for 15 years. So I've had many friends that took until they were 40 to figure out that, I don't like to manage people that much. I like to do deals, or I want to actually do creative work, or I really want to go back and do more technical work, or I just want to work in the nonprofit area. And then they were able to make that path, but it was sort of a messy way of getting there.
Yeah, I'd like to challenge that a little bit. Some of the best career advice I ever got was in the introduction to a book of Dilbert cartoons. And it was by Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert. And he was passing on some advice that he got early in his life, which was basically there are 2 ways to succeed. either be really, really good, like top 0.1% at a single skill, or be like reasonably good-ish at several overlapping skills. And so in his case, those skills were humor, drawing, and sort of the entrepreneurship of having a cartoon strip. I've seen a lot of people be very successful being reasonably good-ish software developers, reasonably good-ish communicators, and reasonably good-ish sort of consultant-style problem solvers at understanding a client's needs and deeply, not just what they say they want, but what's underneath that. There's a Henry Ford quote, incidentally, which is always apropos, which is that Henry Ford said if he had given people what they said they wanted, he would have given them faster horses. But he didn't give them faster horses, he gave them a car because he was thinking what's underneath it. And that's a skill. And so if you're, good-ish at that skill and good-ish at communication and good-ish technically, I think you're in the clear, even if you didn't do one thing for 20 years, 7 days a week, all 24 hours a day.
So you might subscribe to the Steve Jobs quotes where he says, I don't ask people what they want because they don't really know, right?
I think you can still ask them what they want, but don't blindly do whatever they tell you in response. You have to think about what's behind it. Yeah. But I think unless you're as genius as Steve Jobs, there is sometimes value in asking people.
On a complete side note, when I said earlier that I created a website for the media company that changed my entire career and decided to go pursue the internet, the website I created was the Dilbert website. Yeah, and so I spent 95 with Scott Adams, because we actually own the copyright to build, so I spent many, many hours with Scott Adams, which is a fantastic thing to do. That's the
real career advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep mine brief. I'll just say to follow your passion and don't be afraid to fail. Often you learn more from your failures than you do from your success.
I want to comment on one thing that you said about knowing yourself, and that's really not what this panel can do to help people, but it's an important point to make, which is, you can gather lots of information, you can advise people about different careers and about so forth, but the reality is what you really need to do is be honest with yourself and really know what you love or don't love, or what you're good at and really or not good at. And that's really important. But no panel can help you do that. But you could do everything. You could listen to these gentlemen here and so forth. But if you don't have an accurate understanding about what you love or don't love, or what you're good at or not good at, it still won't work. So I would just encourage people, and that's really part of what you were saying, is to understand yourself. Right?
Can I add one more thing? Is I'm always surprised, actually, for some tough love here, at the laziness of most students in spending the time to figure out what they want to do for a career. So if I ask most of the people in the room, what did you do to figure out which college you wanted to go to and how to get in? And you might say, yeah, I spent, 10 days visiting 10 different colleges, and then I spent 50 hours studying for SATs, and I spent entire junior and senior year talking to people, getting advice about which college to go to. So you probably spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours trying to figure out something that actually ultimately wasn't even incredibly important, because if you had gone to Princeton versus Yale versus something else, it would have worked out fine. Yale is great, but they're all great. Now you're making a career choice, and I talk to many people who are seniors, and I say, so tell me the hundreds of hours you've spent in making what's probably a bigger decision, whether you go down path X or path Y. And they're like, yeah, I don't really know. It's hard to tell what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to see who comes on campus, and maybe I'll interview for consulting. And so that's just not, a particularly impressive way of making a pretty big decision. And so going to things like that, thinking about it, reaching out to alums, using your summer jobs effectively, using any breaks you can do, even spending 4 days at a law firm probably gives you a better indication of, do you want to be a lawyer or not? It's certainly better than not spending 4 days there. So I think it's a big investment of time that you should make, and a lot of people don't really do it.
If there's one thing I could add, when I was an undergrad, I found it hard to think about what my career is. Like, to ask the question, what should my career look like, I have to know what dimensions even matter. And the three that have turned out, for me at least so far, to be the ones that have mattered the most are: what skills do I like to use? So do I like to design things? Do I like to talk to people? Do I like to travel into unfamiliar places and try to navigate them? What skills do I like to use? What kind of people do I like to interact with? Every community has different culture, different norms, different sort of personality types that you'll come across a lot. And getting a sense of which crowds you enjoy is a really useful lodestar. And then the third piece is what problems do I like to solve strategically in the really big sense. So like, one of the things for me probably is I like elegant efficiency. I like to take something that's inefficient, that's complicated, that's large, and try to make it more efficient. And it actually almost doesn't matter what that is. That could be figuring out the best way to walk home. That could be, trying to create a new anti-phishing tool. It could be whatever. But, that's something that I like, and I can apply that to different specific jobs that might come along at different years in time.
Yeah.
Anything you guys would add?
No, I think that's good.
Well, we're talking about what kind of people do well and what people are happy, and so what kind of people are happy and not happy. Let's turn it the other way, which is just say, in this whole internet data services area, as you watch people work for you or work with you work for them and so forth, any comments about the types of situations, the type of people where it just didn't seem to, either there's a skill issue or a personality issue or so forth that cause people not to do well, right, or not to be happy. Any?
Yeah, I mean, in my business, there's such a tremendous attentiveness to detail, and so when we have people who don't focus on the level of detail that's required or don't enjoy it, they're not successful. So that's been really the biggest factor we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, to add on that, I think there's a lot of sort of what I call executive functioning skills that are extraordinarily important. And I see all the time, especially in people applying for jobs, the number of people who are, late to the appointment, make mistakes in correspondence, just gives you a sense that there's not good follow-up. There's not incredible follow-up. And if you don't see incredible follow-up in a job process, I doubt we're going to see it on the job. I always remember when I had a head of sales early on in my career who was hiring someone. I interviewed him, and I said, we should call him back. I had an interview. He was fantastic. And the guy said, no, we're not calling him back. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, I don't have a thank you note yet. And I said, I know, but the guy's great. And he said, I don't care if you're CEO. If this guy does not send me a thank you note tomorrow, he's not coming back. And that's it. And he said, in sales, that's important. Engineering, a little bit less important. But for sales, you got to do it. And he didn't send the note, and we never contacted him again.
And where is he now?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, I
Any
guess.
comments? Because you're at a large organization with lots of different people. Some probably are very happy, and some not necessarily happy, right?
And I almost never get thank you notes.
Oh.
I wonder if it's me though. I don't know. I think in my experience, one of the biggest determinants is actually comfort with ambiguity. That there's all sorts of ambiguity coming at you. There's ambiguity about, are you building the right thing? Is it going to work technically? Is it going to make people happy? Are people going to adopt it? Is marketing going to do what marketing said they would do? Is your executive going to give you the support that he promised? And I've seen people grind themselves down totally needlessly because they just can't sort of put blinders on and say, here's what I need to do. Here's the thing that's in front of me on my personal plate, and I'm going to execute on this, and maybe it will succeed and maybe it will fail, and I'm comfortable with that. And so that's a sort of state of mind that I think is really underappreciated in this community.
Go ahead.
Okay, one more thing. One thing I ask people to think about is, let's say there's 6 of you working on a project. And I came into you and said, this is a great project. We're going to turn it into a company. The first thing I need you guys to do is you have to elect one of you as the CEO. And this person has the ability to hire and fire everyone else in the group. And it's one of you. And you got to vote for someone else. And so think about why you would vote for someone and why you wouldn't, just in your group. And then when you go through that, and you're probably going to say, I want someone who's technically good at what we're doing, so I respect their judgment on this. I want them to be fair, because they can fire or hire me. So I want them to be fair and trust their judgment. I want them to be kind of a good person. I don't want to have some total jerk that I am working for, even if they're technically good. So you're going to combine those things. And then as you think of that profile, think of what you need to do in your career so that you are that person. Because that is going to happen. It won't be necessarily your peers, but in a way it is. When you promote people up, they're going to now manage their peers. And I think over time, most people want to be that person. And so somewhere here, people in this panel got promoted up so that they're managing their former peers. And work on those skills and try and think realistically, why would I not be that person? How can I work on being that person that everyone will feel good, like, yeah, that's the person who should be in charge here.
If I can add one thing, when you graduate, the amount of feedback you get on a monthly level drops off a cliff. Because if you're an undergrad, you're getting grades constantly. Papers, tests, quizzes, exams, projects, whatever. You're always receiving feedback. Maybe you don't agree with all of it, but it's there. Once you go out into the workforce, you're going to get almost no feedback. Maybe every year or every 6 months, you'll get a short review, maybe based on a couple peers, your manager, but they have their own agendas. And so you really do have to seek it out and be asking yourselves those questions. Otherwise, you can basically sleepwalk through a decade and then wonder why you haven't been promoted.
It's interesting. One of the things that, Kevin, you talked about was having passion for something. And I think that's very, very important. I want to underline it. And in fact, if you go to the Yale website about admissions, they have a great quote from Kingman Brewster, the former president of Yale, which is really wonderful. And it applies to more than just, admissions. And that is, I'm inclined to believe that people who have an incredible passion for something are likely to achieve more and contribute more than just someone who's very smart and may have a lot of capabilities, but doesn't have a passion for things. And it really reminds me of one, it's not internet and so forth, but an entrepreneur. I went to Harvard Business School, and there was a guy, he was a friend of mine, and we could just not get him to go to class, because all he would do is he would go down and he'd watch people going in and out of delis and so forth. He just loved, retail food things. And he founded Au Bon Pain and Panera Bread, right? Now, he didn't get the highest grades, right, as Ron Shaich, but he was incredibly passionate about, how people got food and how they do it. And that was the key to his success.
That's great.
So I think that's a big component of all of this, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I don't think that they teach enough at Yale is also communication and collaboration. In the business world, you can't be successful doing everything by yourself. People at Yale obviously have high IQ or intellectual capabilities, but we talk a lot about EQ or emotional intelligence, and relying on your partners, relying on your peers, communicating and collaborating. So this goes along with what
Kevin.
Sorry, Kevin. This goes along with what Kevin was saying, about building these other skills and learning how to communicate and collaborate. Sorry.
I have one question specifically for you, and that is, you're the one who's most heavily involved with data, right?
Sure.
They're all involved with data, but it's more the focus of your company. All this talk about big data, so forth, so on. How should these students and alumni think about it? As is it the big opportunity that some people talk about, or is it just a lot of hype and so forth? And where are the careers in that sphere, right?
Yeah, and there is a tremendous amount of opportunity. The careers vary between being a programmer, building or leveraging big database technologies like Hadoop or MongoDB or Vertica, to being a data scientist, to analyzing the data, but then also being in front of clients, marketing and selling or articulating data as well. So it really varies, but where we're heading in terms of the industries are you have to be able to leverage and analyze data.
Yeah, just to build on that, for data visualization, we've done some work on visualizing, for example, DDoS attacks around the world every day with Arbor networks. And there's a team within Google that's pretty small that basically are some of the world's experts on that kind of data visualization. And it's amazing how sought after they are inside the company. Like, everyone wants to benefit from how do you take this enormous data set and make sense of it. And everyone is trying to convince them, oh, our data set is the most interesting. Our problem is the most exciting. It's sort of what you were describing earlier about retaining engineers, but it's 100 times harder because there's so much data in the world now. And the number of people who know both computationally and artistically and sort of general wisdom savvy how to make sense of it is very small. So if you have any interest in those areas, that's going to be explosive in the next decade.
Now, what I'd like to do is turn over. I'm starting to get questions from the folks on streaming video and so forth. And so let's open up for the moment to questions. Brian, is there anyone? Let's start out with the folks at Yale. Anyone who wants to ask a question, raise their hand, and Brian will coordinate the questions from there. Oh, we've lost Brian. Are there any questions from the folks at?
Wait, here's something.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. They have a microphone, so you might want to come down to the mic. There we go.
Thanks for this. It's very inspirational. I have a question on first job choices after graduation. So I'm a master's student in statistics at Yale, and I'll be graduating this May. So while choosing the first company to work for after graduation, I would probably work as an analyst person. Should I go for larger companies that have more systematic training and tutoring on our skills? Or should I go for more smaller companies like startups where there are more opportunities, but you will have to learn a lot of yourself and really get your hand dirty? I think, especially as like the first job after graduation. Thanks.
So look, there's no right answer to that. To refine what I said before, my bias for you would be, there's nothing more interesting than joining what I'd call a startup, but a startup that's, let's say, 200 people to, a couple thousand, that's growing really quickly. So like all of us who joined, who were the 500th employee at Facebook, at Google, at Airbnb, at a company like that, I think has had an incredible run. Now, you can have a run for a long time, but that's just a magical moment where the company's doubling, tripling, quadrupling in size in just a couple years. Lots of responsibility, very smart people, but yet you're still getting you start to manage people and people are managing you. The only downside when you're only 21 or 22 and you join a startup is I'm not sure you're going to learn the core techniques.
But we're still good.
So.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that in some ways the specifics matter most. So if you're joining like a really big company, make sure that you understand the team, the exact role, the fit, etc. Because if you're joining a company like a Google or a Microsoft or any company that's over 10,000 people, your mileage may vary depending on the specifics.
Yeah, I agree.
So I have a question here from Alex Carrillo, who's on the streaming video, who has a question for Kevin, which says, how did you plan your career as a student when the internet was not yet a factor?
There's an assumption built into that question. That's true.
Yeah. I just knew about the internet 30 years before it had been invented. And so, just watch and learn. It's hard to do. No, I think as I said earlier, I had no idea. So I really went up. Most people are going to go up a functional route. I was going up a finance route. And then the internet came along, and either through incredible luck, hopefully some skill, I figured out that I thought would be a really promising industry to go into. And if I could just extrapolate on that for 1 second, we had an earlier question of whether or not there are areas of the internet or data that are not that great. And actually, I think most areas are pretty good. A different question would be, if you're going into a career where it's almost shrinking, like if you said I want to go into print magazines or even consumer products to a certain degree. If you want to go work for P&G, most areas are not growing and may not grow for a long time. And that makes your career much, much harder. We're all in areas that just grew pretty quickly over our career. And so maybe we were good, maybe we weren't, but there are a lot more opportunities when there's a rising tide. If you go the other way, it can be very, very ugly and can be just much tougher. So I'm heavily biased towards being in general areas that are growing and growing for the next 20 years, not the next year.
Yeah.
If I can, go for it. No, after you.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was going to echo the same words, but also attach yourself or find someone that is really bright, that you like to work with, and that you can learn with. I was fortunate to have a mentor for 12 years, and I followed him to 3 companies.
Nice.
Do we have any questions here in New York? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so you both, I mean, all of you mentioned the importance of people skills and working with teams. How would you recommend for someone new out of school to build that and develop that over time, or also leadership skills at the end?
Yeah, some of it's hard because you can't just learn it in a classroom easily. But certainly for me, extracurricular activities, working with people, you're gonna learn it also by just being in the office. I mean, during internships and afterwards. And I think you want to make sure you get feedback. I mean, I think you brought up a good point. People may not be commenting. Don't forget, after every meeting, if this was a meeting at the end of the day, we might be thinking, wow, did she do a great job or not? Did she come across well or not? You may not be thinking that, but we're thinking that. And so you need to know what everyone else is thinking, getting that feedback, and then trying to get better. I mean, everyone gets better not one day. It's like playing basketball or something. It's over a year or 2 years or 3 years. But you can work on many things: public speaking, presentation, interaction, as long as you know what people think of what you're doing.
Well, following Quan, do you think the answer is different to her question if you're in the internet, in the internet or data services? In other words, are the leadership skills or the interpersonal skills different in this sector versus, say, if you work for a car company, whatever? I'd be curious whether
leadership skills transform whether you're in the military service or whether you're in any industry. Good communication skills, being very self-aware of what you're good at and what you're not good at, transforms to any industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only difference that I might flag is that the cultural gap between an engineering team and a client organization for whatever that client is really big in the internet world, probably bigger than it is in the military, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to translate and being able to sit with the engineers and call them on their BS occasionally, which they'll test you, they will, in a good way, and you have to respect the fact that they're testing you. But then also being able to work with whatever your clients are, whether they're paying you money or not, and understand how their world's logic works is really challenging.
But if you become a lawyer or a banker, and I'm sure you said, I saw people who were technically good at what they did, and so they went pretty far. And at a certain point, the skills that are needed change, and you got to bring in business. And so some lawyers and bankers could bring in business, and clients would hire them, and they get promoted. And the guy next to him is a little frustrated because, like, I'm technically a little bit better, but the guy who brings in revenues is a very important person. And so those are different skills. And those, all of us had to make that transition from an individual contributor over time to more of a manager, whether it's in technology or banking or finance.
Yeah, I think that's right. In fact, there's no question that when you're in a more junior thing, it's more about being very good at solving a particular problem or technical thing. But as you rise, that becomes less important.
Yeah.
It's more how you deal with people, how you communicate, how you sell. And a lot of people don't make that transition, right?
Yeah.
Any additional question here we have one in New York. Someone's raising a hand. Go ahead.
Hi there. Kevin had mentioned that most industries are, in essence, becoming tech industries, and that's where most of the growth is going to be. So what advice would you guys have for people who aren't coming from a tech background, but the industry they're in is definitely converging into a tech industry? How do we grow our skills to be as relevant as possible?
Yeah, and by the way, I have no tech background. So I took one computer science class at Yale, and I think it was in Fortran, if I remember right. And it was, I went to Yale in the 19th century. So
Did you have those little cards and things that you had to punch?
150. I used an abacus. It was 150 years ago. And I've pursued a career. But I think I advise anyone. I advise my son who's at Yale that taking classes in this area is important. Reading about it is important. Learning about it on your own is very important. Taking your own online courses. I think you just want to have as much preparation as possible. Most people are not going to be programmers, and that's okay. But understanding how it works is important. And you have friends who either spend a lot of time and learn other languages or know a lot about geopolitical events, and some people do and some people don't. Well, here's an area where that should be an arrow in your quiver.
And let's be honest, there's no shortage of 2-week boot camps now.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a friend who was a Yale, came to Google in HR, said, you know, I want to be part of the technology solution. Took an evening class at Stanford, didn't get a master's, didn't get anything, but learned the skills and transferred ladders. Now he's a product manager.
I have a question here for Jared.
Oh, go ahead. There's
I'm
that
sorry.
one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which is, as an electrical engineering major, now that you're in finance, do you miss hardware engineering? Not quite on point question, but I figured I'd ask it.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of what we're doing now does leverage some of the skills that I got in undergrad, but more so, as I mentioned, working in Silicon Valley. So, you know, we focus on big data, but we also focus on transporting data at high speeds and big capacity. So understanding network switches. We're one of the largest users in financial services of a company called Arista, which is a big competitor to Cisco for low latency switches. So being able to understand the technology, being able to articulate it to clients is still very important.
Brian, if you can hear me, is there any questions, another question from the Yale group at all?
Anyone? Yes, in the over here.
Yes? Okay, go ahead.
Hi. So the title of the panel was a candid view of the profession, and in a previous session of consulting, we heard about some of the downsides of that profession, particularly long hours, lots of travel. It can be difficult for people who want to have families or already have families. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about some of the negatives involved in the profession.
Well, let's start with one that's inherent coming from a startup background. But in 2000, DoubleClick had 2,000 employees, and we were only 4 years old, so that sounds great. That's the good news. We lost 70% of our clients in the next 3 years, and I did 7 consecutive rounds of layoffs and either let go of or sold as part of a transaction 1,000 employees. And so when you're having that conversation with someone who you persuaded to quit their job, take a huge pay cut because they believed in what you were doing, and then 9 months later you fire them, not because they're doing a bad job, but because you don't have enough business for them to be there, and you know that they're probably not going to be able to get another job right now because we're in the middle of a recession and no one's hiring. That's a tough conversation. And or a tougher conversation that happens to lots of people is, which I haven't had happen, but you start a company and you end up firing everyone, closing it down, and everyone who invested in you, including your uncle and your best friends, all lost all of their money. That's the downside of this, and that's pretty ugly. And you've got to be ready to do that in small degrees or large degrees if you want to play startups. If you're going to play baseball and said, I'm happy to play baseball, I just want to make sure I never strike out, then someone would say, well, yeah, you better not play baseball because you're probably going to strike out about half the time, so you'll just be depressed all the time. Well, there's a certain element of that for startups as well. There's a lot of gain if things go well, and I don't mean financially, I mean psychologically, and there's pain that comes with it, and there's risk that comes with it, and you'll go through some pretty ugly times.
I think that's true at big companies too. I mean, the rule of thumb on many teams is you need at least 1 million users per engineer to justify, and sometimes it's an order of magnitude higher. What that means is that if you're working on one of those teams, you are responsible for over 1 million users on average. And so if, let's say 100,000 of those users are really upset by a trade-off that's had to be made, that's kind of your problem, and you just got to deal with that. If Google Reader has to get shut down because it doesn't have enough users to justify the eng team that would have to maintain it, that's your problem. You just have to deal with that. And so I think that even success brings the challenge that the scaled model of the industry means that there's always going to be more than you have time to do, always more expectations than you have time to satisfy, always more desires than you have the ability to make real.
I watched our stock price go from $130 to $5. And it turns out that people who have hedge funds don't really like that. So everyone hated me, both internally and externally. So it was sort of a 360 hate.
By the way,
I
want to make a comment about something you said a few minutes ago, which is this issue of timing for different industries. And I think your point was you know, internet and data is growing fast, so at least you're swimming with the stream is with you. There are others like publishing where, you know, you're going to swim, you know, against the stream and so forth. And I'll make a comment. That's very important. I think that's a very important insight, and one that you really ought to think about. And I'm not in technology, but I will tell you that when I went into investment banking, it was a good time because investment banking was lucrative, it was profitable, it was growing, there were lots of new things developing. If you ask me today, would I go into investment banking today, coming up? The answer is probably not, because it's become very mature, very structured, regulated, and the ability for an individual to do well, so forth, is very diminished. And that's true for a lot of other professions too. I think the medical is heading that way. Certainly legal is heading that way. So I think Kevin's comment is very important for you, which is all things equal, that should be a factor. Now, if you just have an absolute passion for being an investment banker, God forbid, then you should do it in spite of the fact it's become a mature industry. But all other things, if you have to choose between two careers, and one is in a growing industry and one is not, that should be an important factor, right?
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Any other questions here from the New York group? Go ahead.
Compared a lot of high-tech startups in Silicon Valley, and I heard that New York now has quite a few in Europe as well. So for the future trend, like in California drought, New York has snow, what the more startups move to New York, or how I guess.
Yeah, so New York is doing extraordinarily well in startups. I think it's growing faster than probably almost any city in the United States. Silicon Valley is still, and San Francisco is still the biggest area for startups, but New York could not be doing better. And there's no such thing as the entire ecosystem. If you said sub areas, you know, databases, San Francisco is much bigger. All online media, New York dominates. Fashion, ad technology, many different areas. New York's doing great and will continue to grow. You know, the reality is in the United States and across the world that the largest cities are the ones that are doing the best in technology. Because at the end of the day, you walk into the Google office or any tech office, you cut right through it. All there is are, people with computers. And so the raw material in our companies is really just people. So wherever smart, young people are going to is where companies need to go there. And for right now, New York and San Francisco are fantastic. Other large cities are good. But
Texas is also growing well. They're trying to move people from California to Texas.
So Texas is growing in terms of job creation as a state. It's doing pretty well. If we had to have a conversation about all the internet startups in Texas that are really successful and big, it'll be a short conversation. It doesn't compare at all to New York or California. But other industries, primarily oil and gas and some others are doing well.
Yeah, the one sector that Kevin didn't mention in New York that's thriving is financial technology as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Being in close proximity to Wall Street. You do see on the West Coast payment services and some disruptive financial service companies as well.
Any industry where the raw talent, is largely in one city, offline, that city will probably eventually dominate online. So, that, by the way, biotech, Boston is stronger than New York. They just have historical great research, and New York has great research as well, but they have a history of the companies, and so they're still much bigger than New York. But in terms of internet, New York is years ahead of Boston.
Well, we've hit the official ending time in a couple of minutes. First of all, I want to thank our panelists who have, I think, done a wonderful job of telling their story, but also giving a candid view of the profession. I also want to thank those of you who are at Yale and here and those online for participating. This is being recorded, so if you want to watch these three gentlemen talk multiple times, you'll be able to do reruns
over and over,
over and over again.
It's like Friends or Star Trek. You just can't get enough.
No, exactly. But you'll be able to watch it ad-free, so it's so there'll be no disincentive. But I want to thank everyone and the people who helped to co-sponsor this. And this will be the last session for this particular academic year. but we'll start up again in the fall and have about 4 or 5 next year. So thank you very much, and I want to thank, all join me in thanking our panelists.